Isfahan. What's your reading of what you're hearing and the various bits of intelligence that we're now getting?
Well, good morning. I suppose it's not a great surprise that, notwithstanding the calls for restraint that have been echoing around and being delivered by international statesmen visiting Israel over the last few days, that Israel has decided to retaliate in some shape or form following the attacks of Sunday last weekend. Of course, we don't know. We're all following the news media at the present moment to see what is actually being reported. But what it would seem is that Israel has retaliated, but in a fairly modest and moderate way. Of course, that's an initial assessment. We may find that there are successive waves of drones and missiles coming in. But if, as it would seem, that they are retaliating in principle with a small number of missiles, it's probably Netanyahu making the point that no one's going to tell him what to do. And if he chooses to retaliate, he will. But he may well have listened to the messages of restraint and therefore be retaliating in a modest way, but just to make the point that no one messes with Israel.
Lord Dannatt, there was also a very stark warning from Iran this week, wasn't there, that they had their finger on the trigger. If Israel were to attack their nuclear facilities, then Iran would rethink its nuclear stance. The IAEA confirming this morning no damage to Iran's nuclear sites, which is significant, isn't it?
Well, it is. It would be a major escalation if Israel had chosen to strike any of the Iranian nuclear facilities. I think we'd all recognise, in whatever conflict it is, that if you strike another country's nuclear capability, then you really are stepping things up. So I would be surprised and very disappointed and very worried if it turned out that they had attacked a nuclear facility. But as I said a moment or two ago, I'm less surprised that, notwithstanding the calls for restraint, that Israel has retaliated, I think, to make the point that it intended to, and it has. But if it turns out that their attacks are moderate, then it may be part of drawing a line under this chapter of tit-for-tat strikes, which started on the 1st of April in Damascus, then last weekend, and now something else. Again, I think it's one of the wider points about this conflict is that it's certainly not in Iran's interest to precipitate a major conflict not so much with Israel, but with the United States and other Western countries. Yes, we all know that Iran is the sponsor of Hamas, the Houthis, Hezbollah. So Iran can dial this up or dial this down. But I think most people would agree that it's not actually in Iran's interest to precipitate a major attack or a major conflict. So I think we watch with interest and hope very much that this is a moderate retaliation by Israel and not the precursor to something more fundamental.
And we believe that Israel warned the United States before launching this strike. Also, Netanyahu, very strong actually with David Cameron, saying that it is up to Israel how to respond, not up to the United Kingdom. Do you think that, given this strike was limited, as we've heard, that there is no damage to Iran's nuclear sites, do you think that this will draw a line under the current conflict?
Well, of course, we don't know. I think one can hope that it will. As I said just now, I don't think it's in Iran's wider interest or in Iran's interest to have a wider conflict, particular conflict with the United States. And we have to remember that Iran's regime is not as stable as they would like it to be. There is considerable opposition within Iran, and therefore they have, to an extent, think about their own domestic public opinion. So I think I would like to hope that what started on the 1st of April in Damascus continued last weekend in a massive way, but was neutralized by the Israeli defenses and, of course, with international support, that this retaliation does indeed draw a line on it, draw a line under it. It would be in everyone's interest in that wider region if that indeed was the case.
New sanctions have also been announced on Iran, specifically targeting the defence sector, military and aircraft and missile manufacturing facilities. Will they make any difference? Do sanctions work?
Well, announcing sanctions is is a measure of some, I can say, effect. I think you can only see the effect when actually some things that were going on stop. But putting sanctions on Iran is not an unreasonable thing to do, particularly not just in the context of what's going on in the Middle East, but the fact that Iranian missiles have been supplied and are being used against the Ukrainians. So there are connections here between not just the Middle East, but actually what's going on in Ukraine as well. Now, whether sanctions are effective, that's really down to individual countries, individual companies, whether they abide by those sanctions. But it's not a surprising thing that further sanctions have been slapped on Iran. Whether they're effective, I think only time will tell.
I wonder if you have a view on Qatar. Qatar saying it's reassessing its role as a mediator between Israel and Hamas. This is essentially, they're saying they felt exploited and abused and being undermined by those trying to score political points. Qatar is crucial in these negotiations, isn't it?
Hitherto it has been. Qatar is an interesting country. It's, as we know, it's extraordinarily rich. It's got a great wealth, which gives it a certain degree of confidence. And that has placed it outside other groupings. It sort of stands apart from Saudi Arabia, stands apart from the UAE, it stands apart from Egypt, and does its own thing, and has been quite content to be the center of other international negotiations. We saw Qatar played a role when Donald Trump, a number of years ago, had a bilateral negotiation with the Taliban, which led to the eventual US withdrawal from Afghanistan. And Qatar has, I think, quite enjoyed the prominence of being the international home of the Hamas leadership. But I think by the reports that one's heard in the last few days, they are feeling frustrated and perhaps a little bit embarrassed that the apparent influence and leadership that they were trying to give out to the world that they were exerting doesn't actually turn out to have been the case. If it had been the case, then I think we would have seen some form of negotiated ceasefire, whether a long ceasefire or a pause in Gaza before. So I think the Qataris are feeling, yeah, as they say, abused. I think they're feeling fed up that they've been made a bit of a fool of.
Meanwhile, the situation in Gaza, which we haven't even mentioned yet, because, of course, we are all distracted by the picture in Iran. Where are we in terms of Israel's planned offensive on Rafah? Warnings from the United States not to attack Rafah, the US denying that they had issued the green light if Israel were to exercise restraint over Iran for them to attack Rafah. What is the situation now on the ground in terms of Rafah?
Well, I think if you just reflect on the comment or the question you asked me a few moments ago, Netanyahu's attitude when David Cameron called for restraint with regard to Iran, the fact of the matter is that Israel will pretty much do what Israel wants to do. And Netanyahu is determined to see through the strategic objective of destroying Hamas. And therefore, it's almost entirely logical that at some point, we may be reaching that point quite soon now, that Israeli forces are going to go into Rafah to root out, as they would see it, the last stronghold of Hamas. The problem, of course, comes, and it's the problem that we've seen for the last 6-7 months, is that Rafah is a highly populated area, just as the whole of Gaza has been. And this underlines the difficulties of carrying out an operation against terrorists as they would see them, and I think that's a reasonable description, in an area that's highly densely populated with other people. So I suspect that they will go into Rafah, almost irrespective of what the Americans have or have not said. But the way the Israelis need to pay attention to international opinion is to make sure that at the same time into other parts of Gaza, sufficient aid gets in to, frankly, to make sure that the rest of the people in Gaza do not suffer adversely for the lack of food and fuel and medicines. I think the Israelis otherwise lay themselves open to charges of genocide if they continue to block off life-giving and life-saving aid to the Gazan population.
Thank you very much indeed, Lord Dannatt.